This is GDC Podcast. That's a big pop. Hey everybody, I'm Chris Graft. I'm here with Alyssa McAloon.
Hello, I'm Alyssa. I'm a news editor at Gamasutra.
Oh yeah, I forgot to say what I do. I am editor-in-chief of Gamasutra. At least I try to be. And this is the second episode of GDC Podcast, right?
Yeah, second episode.
I know, it's got that fresh podcast smell. Just open it up, and just take that whiff.
It's the fun thing about doing this monthly so far is it feels like it's been a week since we recorded this, so...
I know. It feels like we've been doing this for about 30 years now.
Oh yeah, seasoned podcasters over here.
Very seasoned. There's been no editing at all in all of this is exactly how it happened. So again, we're here for GDC. That stands for Game Developers Conference. And we kind of started this so that we could give people some insight into these fascinating people who make video games and kind of let people know how they make them. I think that's a noble thing to do, right?
Yeah, turns out they don't just will themselves into existence. There's hardworking teams of dedicated people behind all those many games that are coming out in quick succession this year.
It's true. Well, not all of them will themselves into existence. I think that Will Wright actually willed himself into existence, and that's how he got his name.
And thank you, because Sims content this week.
Oh yeah. Well, let's talk about we have to talk real quick about all right. What are you playing
right now? I'm killing time. As we're recording this, new Sims game pack comes out like 3 hours ago, and it is killing me that I can't be playing it right now. So it'll be that for the rest of the week.
You're that dedicated of a podcaster, and you have waited this long to play the new Sims.
Yeah, it's installing. Like I on my lunch, I went to go start installing it. So it pains me.
What do you like so much about The Sims? I mean, it's a great game, but you're obsessed with it.
I am a micromanager, and it gives me a way to productively micromanage without pissing anyone off.
Without pissing anyone off?
I don't know. It's one of those weird kind of like with like Stardew Valley and Animal Crossing where you have a bunch of like small little tasks to just kind of like focus on and get into routines and set up all this, and there's like creative output in it. It's just really relaxing. And
so none of your Sims are pissed off?
No, they're all very happy, and I hold them to very high standards individually.
Do you ever do the cruel thing where you just kind of build them into a room and punish them like that?
They make it harder in these ones. You can't just like delete the pool ladder anymore. But
yeah,
we treat our Sims humanely in the year 2019.
That's good. And then I'm playing games too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, do you play any video games?
Do I game? Am I a gamer?
Are you a gamer?
Or am I a gamer? I'm actually playing Astral Chain from Platinum, and it's a lot less Bayonetta, and it's a lot more kind of more detective stuff than I thought there would be. You're basically demon police, and there are these things called Chimera that keep on coming through portals and infecting people and doing all this weird stuff to people. But I'm surprised how much of a mix of action and detective work is in there.
Yeah, from the E3, I think, trailer, it looked like it'd be this really kind of like niche little game that not a lot of people would get into, but a lot of people have been talking about that one.
Yeah, and also there is a toilet fairy in it.
Oh, is that the one that talks about your tweets?
Yeah, that's that was my hilarious tweet joke. I contributed something to the toilet fairy. Yeah, I don't know what it was. It was an item. It wasn't any. Anyway, the toilet fairy thanked me for blessing it.
Video games are art.
They are. And speaking of video games, the Game Developers Conference. There is actually some stuff happening with it. So we opened up the call for summits. So if you have ideas for talks that involve AI, animation, independent games, game narrative, math in game dev, then you should submit a talk on the website. You can find that information at gdconf.com. There's also VRDC, game career development. You can submit your talks before midnight on September 30th at that website. That's midnight, before you turn into a pumpkin. There's also XRDC coming up in October. That's 14th through 15th at Fort Mason Festival Pavilion, and that's in San Francisco. That has to do with all of the fancy visual computing stuff where virtual things are overlaid on reality.
AR, XR, VR, MR, various Rs, the XRs.
Yeah, all the Rs.
All the Rs. 2020 IGF submissions are now open as well. Those are due by midnight on September 30th. Students and non-students can submit games judged on excellence in visual art, audio, design, narrative, and best student game, with finalists in all of those categories. And there is a program going where underrepresented groups can apply for a fee waiver. More details on that can be found at igf.com/submit-your-game. All
right. This is where we start to tease the next guest here. Well, not tease our next guest. Tease what he does, right?
Yeah, don't tease me.
A little background. This person is a past... This is like going to be one of my things on this podcast now. Huge hype right before we introduce the person. All right. Our next guest is a past GDC speaker. He's written for Gama Sutra and Game Developer Magazine. What? Writer and composer and a game dev at Zachtronics, where he worked on such cool system-y type games like Opus Magnum, Exapunks, Shenzhen IO, and also in a past life worked AAA at Bungie, Treyarch, 343 Industries. They made some games. Some of those games were Halo and a Call of Duty, including Call of Duty 2, Big Red 1, which I enjoyed. And
where are you getting this bio from? Oh my god!
It's all on the internet, sir.
Okay.
Yeah, I enjoy. Yeah. I like saying Big Red 1 as in Big Red 1.
Big Red 1.
Yeah, Big Red 1.
Yeah.
And so if you he also did the great Twine game. The writer will do something that is about floundering development of a AAA game. And the latest game to come out is Eliza from Zachtronics. So if you'll join me in unveiling our guest, Matthew Burns. Hi, Matthew.
Hello.
Hi. Well, you have a long storied past in the game industry. I've actually known of you for a while. Mm-hmm. I feel like now I know you a bit.
After all that research that you've done.
After stalking me on the internet, yeah.
Yeah, this is what Alyssa and I are getting really good at.
Mm-hmm.
We are better at internet stalking than we are at podcasting, which,
That's okay.
Hopefully that'll pay off someday. Now, you started in the game industry. It seems like you must have started pretty early on in your life, like in your career. Can you talk about how it all started?
How I got started? Sure. Yeah. I think it was 2000 or 2001, something like that. So I guess it's coming up on like 18 years now. Started right out of school as a tester in the basement of Activision in Santa Monica, the same building that they still are in right now. But I was absolutely just a temp tester, kind of like starting on the lowest rung, and eventually became a producer. And I was a producer the entire time I was on AAA, and went through the various studios that you mentioned and various franchises that you mentioned. And then I tried to go indie once. That didn't work out, and I went back to AAA, and then I tried to go indie again, And now I'm here at Zachtronics, where I do the writing and music, which is more interesting to me than the production stuff for right now, because it's new and it's stuff I haven't done before. So I guess that's the short version of my journey through the game industry.
Just taking notes here. Basically, you crawled out of the basement of Activision, is how I heard it.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And made your way.
So the test department at Activision is literally in the basement of the building. Like
of course it is.
It's like metaphorical, and it's kind of funny. It's also a little bit like sad, but like it's always been in the literal basement.
Can you describe this basement? Was it dank, damp, dark?
It's there's no windows obviously, and it's just sort of this large open space that is the underground floor of like a large office-y building, and there's fluorescent lights that buzz faintly, and a break room with vending machines in it with bags of Gardettos that you can buy for $1.25 or whatever, and like little arcade machine of like Puzzle Bobble or something that you can play.
Once you got a taste of that, you're like,
I was
18 years.
Yeah, I was like, game development
in.
is the life for me. Yeah, this is awesome. Like, I can't wait to just keep making games.
Like a slightly more upbeat metaphor there, like, testers are the foundation of game development. If you really want to like put that on a cat poster, you could get there, I think.
That's
it's an
true.
important job, yeah.
I mean, it's like it was. We're making fun of it, but it is, yes, absolutely an important job, and absolutely like not something that shouldn't be taken seriously. Like it should be taken very seriously.
But windows are also kind of beneficial to mental health.
Yeah, exactly. I think. I mean, I'm totally willing to go on the record and say that Activision probably could stand to treat their testers better, both then and now.
The AAA though, working in that for years, just to dig into that a little bit more. Was it anything near what you expected? Because I bet that there are listeners that are thinking, that there are still people out there, despite the news of how hard it can be in this industry, do have a romanticized idea of it. Were you like that?
I think so. I think for like people who are going into AAA now, they definitely have a better sense of like crunch and work-life balance issues and things like that. Like when I talk to students now, a lot of them are familiar with the stories and reporting that has been done on that, and that's a great credit to like the reporters who've been willing to like try to put these stories out there. When I started, there was less of that, like less of like here's what to expect when you do AAA. So I didn't necessarily have like a specific notion of like this is what it was going to be like. It was more just like, okay, now I'm working on a big budget game. Call of Duty is like a big game, seems important, and I'll just do what it takes to get it done.
Yeah.
So at that time, the industry was just a little bit less established, and there was just more kind of fly by the seat of your pants. Not that it's amazing now, right? But there's just like smaller teams and like less sort of developed processes, and just like kind of like doing things and hoping that they work. So I didn't have this specific idea of like it's going to be like this. I just kind of went in hoping to be useful.
Well, you've had a lot of different, jobs in games. You said that you're a producer. That was the, QA and producer side is what you were focusing on. Mm-hmm. Now, what kind of drew you more towards the focus on the writing? And you're also a composer who writes excellent music for these games. Thank you. Yeah, what drew you towards that?
Well, so I joined games because I was interested in them creatively. Like I actually was a tester for 3 years and a producer for like 10 years. But the entire time I had been doing like my own writing on the side and my own music on the side, because I think fundamentally I am a creative person, and I always was. But the thing about like working in games on AAA games, I actually there was a point at which I could decide whether I wanted to be like a designer, like if I wanted to follow like the design track on stuff like Call of Duty. And to be super honest, like the design problems that you have to solve on a game like Call of Duty were not as interesting to me as like kind of like the logistical problems that you have to solve on like how to put the team together and how to do like the voice recording and how to coordinate all the designers and all the assets and stuff like that. So I pursued the production track in AAA because I thought I would like be able to learn more of like the kinds of things that I was interested in and see a lot of the different disciplines and like, stand in on a mocap session and like make a big list of animations or be in the recording studio with participate in all of that kind of stuff. As opposed to the kinds of design problems that you solve in Call of Duty, which are interesting, but were just less like what I wanted to pursue at that time.
When you went indie for the first time, did you stick with kind of a production side of it, or were you more in the like design trenches then?
Yeah, no, at that point then I was like, oh, I want to like, it was tough. So the first time I tried to go indie was like around 2011 or 12. So that was like when indie stuff was really, really early on. And it was like, maybe this is a thing that can be done. And I myself didn't necessarily have a great idea of exactly how it was going to work. Like, you had to sort of be entrepreneurial too at the same time and like pitch your game. And there wasn't necessarily like a great pipeline for how to pitch stuff. So I thought, I have to be like some sort of business guy too. And then also like be involved in like design and like creative direct the game as well at the same time. And it was a super, super artsy game that I think wasn't the type of game that like a big publisher would pay a lot of money for, especially back then. I think maybe now there's more interest in this type of in that type of game, and there's more models for how that type of thing could work. But at the time it didn't quite come together. But yeah, it was always like trying to be creative. The Twine games that I've made were made while I was not working at Zachtronics and working at other jobs, and I would go home and work on my Twine games and that kind of thing.
You had mentioned that you tried to go indie first. Can you talk about what happened there? Because there was that period, and then you went back to AAA.
Yeah. I had saved up a bunch of money, and I was like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to pursue the indie dream. And so in like 2011 or 12, something like that, me and some friends that I had met were like, yeah, we're going to make a game. And I said I had saved up money, but it was like to pay my rent. It wasn't like to pay my collaborators, unfortunately. So we were all kind of working like for free on this thing. Not a model that I would recommend, especially today. But that was like the only way that it could happen then. And I would not do that again in the future. I think it's important to pay everyone for their contribution at this, right now. But so we worked on it, and we had like this sort of demo of the game. It was this musical shooter that we were calling Planck at the time, named after the physicist Max Planck. And it was kind of like inspired by like Rez and Tetsuya Mizuguchi kind of games where it's like cool electronic music and sound and stuff. And I was trying to get money to finish it. And this was a time when there weren't a ton of indie publishers. I think like Devolver was around at this time, but many of the other ones weren't. And so then I would try to pitch to like, Konami or something, right? And it was just like, it doesn't make any sense. And so it didn't happen. Like, people were just not interested enough in the game. It was like too artsy, too out there, not enough precedent for the type of game it was. And to like the deals that were out there for this type of thing were just kind of almost condescending. It would be like I would go to like a publisher, and they would be like, and I would be like, hey, I have this game and I need this amount of money to make it, and then I'll give the game to you. And then they would come back with their counter offer, and they would be like, how about this? We don't give you any money and you still give us the game. And it would just be like, okay, that's not like a real thing. So eventually the money that I had saved up to like pay my rent was running out, and I was like, okay, sorry, I guess this didn't work. So I got another job in AAA to kind of like continue it. But I still felt like, that I had failed in some way, because like I didn't finish the game that I was trying to make at that time.
Yeah, well, I guess join the club, right?
Sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. I forget about those times. And you said this was around 2011?
I think so. Yeah, 10, 11, or 12,
Yeah.
something like that. Yeah.
So to me, who I'm pushing 40 now. 2011 does not seem like that long ago, and it was such a different time where this kind of rise, of the mid-tier, or the more boutique style publishers like Devolver weren't really established as they are now, or a lot of them not even around at all. So the idea of you and your little team pitching to the same company that publishes like Metal Gear Solid, or big AAA games like that, it's almost comical these days.
It really was a clear like mismatch. And it was like, hey, I want to do this artsy thing. And they were just like, I don't know what to do with this. I think now there's much more of like a framework that you can be like, hey, I am this type of game. And they understand where you're coming from a little bit better. Yeah. It really was it was super different time. And you're right, it wasn't that long ago.
Yeah. Now, Zachtronics. You joined Zachtronics in 2016, is that right?
Yeah, so I had worked with Zach prior to that. I'd done the music for Infinifactory and written some stuff for TAS 100. But in 2016 is when I joined basically full time to do both the writing and music for Zachtronics games. So Shenzhen IO was the first Zachtronics game that I did both the writing and music for.
So this always struck me as an interesting pairing too, because you are kind of shaping the future of Zachtronics. As you know, Matthew, I interviewed Zach at GDC like a couple years ago, and we talked about the influence that you're having on it. When you're going into Zachtronics, so if our listeners who don't know, Zachtronics does very systems-based doohickey type games where you add and subtract things from systems, and then you basically, and some of them you press go, and then the system just starts going, and it might collapse in on itself, or it might magically work, and it just gives this amazing sense of progression, like intellectual progression. Intrinsic reward is a big thing with these games. Now, bringing you on, what was the goal with you?
I mean, many of the Zachtronics games mechanically, they come, so with the exception of Eliza, like the mechanics of the Zachtronics games definitely continue to just come from Zach. I don't really try to like make any like design contributions to stuff, especially the more hardcore ones, the ones where you just do assembly language programming. Like I don't really have anything to offer there, like from a design standpoint. But we do what we do talk about, especially early on in the design process, is just kind of the overall story of the game and the world that the game takes place in, and the arc that we take players on as they do these tasks. And that's something that's very important, I think, to us as a studio. It's important to Zach. He doesn't want to make games that are just about manipulating abstract symbols in a vacuum. They have to connect back to the real world in some way. And that's where I really get involved, and I think that's something we talk about from the very get-go. We don't design a game and then like put a skin on it, like, oh, maybe this could take place in medieval times, and then you just put medieval stuff on it. It's really about designing the mechanics and the world and the story all together, all at once. And hopefully by doing that, they all like reflect on each other and reinforce each other.
Now, the latest Zachtronics game, Eliza, is a game that just came out recently, and it's quite a departure in that it is it's a visual novel. It's not one of these super mechanics-heavy games that Zachtronics has become known for.
Right.
Can you talk about how about this, Alyssa? What are you thinking? We're both playing this game right now. What are you thinking of Eliza?
I was not emotionally ready to start it at like 10 p.m. at night. That was a mistake.
My goodness, yeah.
But I feel kind of bad because my preconception of Zachtronic games before this conversation and before doing research and leading up to this had been like, these are puzzle games that are way too tough for me. I had no idea of like the element of kind of world creation that went into that. I just had compartmentalized them away as puzzle games, and I'm gonna go back and recheck some of them now.
No, that's okay. I think like absolutely the most like memorable thing about them is the fact that they are these like sort of programmy puzzle games or engineering puzzle games where you literally have to like do engineering. You literally have to like do an engineering job to like finish the level. You know?
One of the descriptions I read for them was, they're puzzle games for programmers, and I'm like, that is so technical.
Right, yeah.
But there's value in technical stuff as well. Then you go to Eliza, which is a visual novel, which is a very niche genre on its own and entirely different from puzzle games altogether. So how did the idea to be like, here's this story I want to tell with these kind of mechanics about all of this, and how did that kind of snap into visual novel for you guys?
Yeah, and can you just give kind of our listeners just the background of this the story of what Eliza is about?
Oh yeah, that too.
Sure, yeah. So Eliza is a visual novel. It's kind of about this therapy app that a large tech company based in Seattle has developed. The way I pitch it to people often is saying, like, imagine Amazon added a therapy function to Amazon Alexa. So like you would come home after a day at work and just be like, Alexa, I don't feel so good. And Alexa would be like, why don't you feel so good? And then you could just like talk to your Amazon Alexa, and it would like listen to you and creepily record you and upload all of your like deep thoughts to Amazon. And so it's a little bit like that, although there's a twist in that the AI responses provided to it are supposed to be read by real human beings called proxies. And proxy work is maybe analogous to like Uber or Lyft or DoorDash or something like that, where you, as a proxy, your job is to just kind of show up and like read these words that are provided to you at someone who is in for therapy. So it's about these therapy clients that come in. It's about you being the proxy and not really having a choice about what you say to them. And it's also about the people who make this technology and whether they're really helping or not, and the choices that you make when you work in technology and the effect that you have on the world as an engineer. So that's kind of in a nutshell what Eliza is all about. There's a lot of other stuff too. There's stuff about, you know, burnout and working in the tech industry. There's stuff about all this other stuff.
There's so much stuff in it. It touches on all this stuff like AI bias. You know, you're talking about, like you said, burnout, work-life balance, this responsibility that people developing technology feel or don't feel about it, what they're making. What got you thinking about all this? Did you just watch a bunch of Black Mirror, or is I mean, like, a lot of this stuff is very realistic. That's one thing. This is a believable world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, living in Seattle for the past decade or so, seeing the city transform pretty dramatically as Amazon has taken over more and more of it is one thread of that. Because I work in games, many of the people that I'm, you know, professional colleagues with or friends work at companies like Microsoft or Amazon. You know, Microsoft has Xbox, right? And Amazon has Amazon Game Studios. So there are plenty of Microsoft, Amazon, and Google has a big campus up here as well. Employees of these big tech companies in this area and people that I know. I also, you know, I mentioned earlier, I work on my own stories in my own time. And during one job that I had like 5 or 6 years ago, I want to say like 2014, I saw a demo of a real therapy application developed with funding from DARPA that was cameras on people's faces, and there was like a 3D avatar that was talking at them, like this like kind of old school like Second Life looking 3D person, and it was like, you know, how are you doing? And then the person would be like, oh, I don't know. And then all these like metrics would be like on their face, like if they were blinking or smiling or, all of that kind of stuff. And it was the point of the system was to determine if people maybe had signs of PTSD or something like that. And the reason why it was funded by DARPA, which is part of the Defense Department, was because maybe they were going to like use it on soldiers who like came back from Afghanistan or whatever, and then they would like sit them in front of this like computer system, and it would like scan their face while they talked to see if they had PTSD or not. So I saw that demo, and it was just like really stuck with me, right? For whatever reason, it was just like the idea of that, you send some 20-year-old kid into war and give them PTSD, and then they come back and they have to talk to a robot about it. Like, I really wanted to do something with that, or like make a story about it. So, and this was before Black Mirror, but like it just felt like really arresting, and so I was like thinking about like maybe I'll make this a Twine game or something like that. And so I had written a bunch of stuff about it, and so one day Zach and I were talking. I think this was after maybe after Opus Magnum. We were just talking about like future stuff that we could do. I think that Zach feels that we can always make more puzzle programming games. Like, we feel like we understand that genre pretty well. Zach is basically the inventor of that genre. But it's cool to try new things and do new things. And so I told him about this idea that I'd had, and then I was like, kind of pitched him on this idea of doing it as a visual novel that takes a little bit of art and a little bit of programming time and stuff. And he was like, yeah, let's do it. Let's make this as a Zachtronics game, and sort of put it through our process. And so that allowed the art to happen, and that allowed like the voice recording to happen and things like that. So I totally jumped at the chance to be able to do it that way.
Did Zach have any reservations whatsoever that it might not resonate with the typical Zachtronics audience?
Absolutely, yeah. We talked about that a lot. There were a lot of, like, we had no idea if anyone would like this at all. We had no idea if, like, Zachtronics fans would, like, yell at us and be mad and show up at our homes or something like that, right?
You made a visual novel.
Yeah, right. We were concerned about that. We were also concerned that, like, by making a visual novel about, like, kind of just 30-somethings talking about their careers and stuff, like, that's not really typical visual novel fare, right? And so, like, maybe visual fans of visual novels won't like it, and then also people who are not fans of visual novels won't play it anyway because it's a visual novel, right? So it's like, maybe we're making a game for nobody. And that was a real fear while we were making it. And then also, how would people who associate Zachtronics with this very specific genre, how would they feel about it as well?
I mean, isn't Grey's Anatomy about people talking about work in their 30s and 40s and people like that, right?
Sort of.
The Grey's Anatomy of video games, is that what you're getting?
Yeah, I don't know. It's definitely like, it's about like adult things, and I mean adult in the sense of like paying your mortgage adult, not the other kind of adult. Yeah,
it's... and Alyssa and I were talking about how, and this isn't, this is a compliment to the game. It's depressing, and but in a way that I want games to make me feel something real, and I think that a lot of people will agree with me that like that comes along not very often, and when you're sitting there. With the initial patient, you're sitting there as the proxy, and then you start to realize that you can only read out what the Eliza AI is telling you to say, or else you'll get fired. Like right there, that takes away your agency. It takes away your propensity to help people. It takes away any empathetic action that you could possibly take, and that's what's interesting. Like, and you've talked about this before at GDC, about choice and how you handle choice, and a lot of times it's not about the choices that are interesting, it's about how they're presented. So can you talk about that, about designing for choice in a game that doesn't have much of it?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll I'll just come out and say it, that the way Eliza is designed is that you don't have a choice for a very long time. I want to say the first 2/3 of the entire game are just completely linear, and then it opens up towards the end and you do have a choice. And that's a very, very deliberate like design strategy that I'm using from a narrative design standpoint, of using all of that time at the beginning to set up like what I think is a very interesting and complex choice at the end. So instead of bombarding you with small incremental choices throughout the duration of your play, what you get is kind of an interesting situation and an interesting story and an interesting world, hopefully. And then you are presented with with the chance to make a choice. It's a lot more resonating. That's my theory anyway. The choice itself becomes a lot more resonating when you understand all of the factors around it, instead of like, you just start the game and you're presented with a choice immediately with no context of like, I don't know what I'm choosing to do if I make these choices, really.
It's like that fills me with anxiety. I'm not so like there's 6 chapters in the game. I'm on chapter 5. So you're getting there. It's kind of like what you're describing is kind of like blowing up a party balloon, and your decision is like, should I stop blowing into it or should I just like keep going? It's like all of this is just building up to one big thing, and I think that's right. A completely fascinating design decision.
Yeah, I think it really allows you to do stuff that you couldn't do in any other way. And so I did talk about this at GDC. I think that's like an interesting approach to think about. And the game itself, like, it's not really very fantastical in a lot of ways. Like, it's really just like modern day kind of life. There's nothing about it that's like made up except for the therapy stuff. And even then, since the game came out, everybody's been like emailing me like these apps they found on the App Store that are like chatbot for cognitive behavioral therapy or whatever.
It's
there's a lot of
believable.
Like, it's totally a thing now.
Yeah.
I think like going into that very first, so you start like your character is the first day as this proxy, right, when you play, and they're going through and talking through their entire like, okay, so you have to go in this room and listen to this person and stick to the script. It's very important that you stick to the script, and that is hammered in. I'm like, oh, here's the mechanic. It's going to be, I have to sit here and right away I'm going to have to decide if I'm going to stick to the script or if I'm going to take a different option. Because that's a very visual novel-y kind of binary choice, is like, do I do A, go down this road, or do I do B and go down the other path?
Right.
But like, right away you don't get that. And I think that kind of, you get resigned to that same kind of anxiety that Chris was talking about. But at the same time, in other, like outside of the Eliza therapy office, you have your text conversations or your face-to-face conversations where you can choose between 2 answers, and the answers might not necessarily be different outside of tone. The outcome will be the same. And those two, like, the difference between those 2 kinds of decision, and also the subtle differences between the actual choices you make, really do a lot to define the character you're playing as, it feels like. Especially because in visual novels, the ones I've played have been like anime nonsense because that's me in a past life. But
totally.
A lot of times your protagonist becomes this empty vessel that you fill with your own personality.
Right.
And the protagonist in Eliza has her own motivations, her own goals, and her own backstory that you uncover through these unique kind of narrative design choices. And I don't have a question I'm building up to here, other than that it's very impressive how all of that was kind of drip-fed to me by subverting what I expected of visual novels in a way.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, like any like textbook that you open about game design will say like games are different because they're interactive, right? Games are different from other mediums because they present you with choices. That's like the defining feature of games. You hear any pundit talking about games will say this. And so what's so powerful to me, like in that, is like actually denying someone a choice. Like that can be such a powerful like move, because like it's a game. You would think that you would want to give people a choice, and so going against that is like kind of a really interesting way to use the tools that you have as a game designer, right? It's like using silence as a composer, or blank space as a writer. I don't know, but the absence of the thing that makes the medium what it is, I think can enhance the other parts of, it can enhance the choices that come later, and it can contrast with, like you said, the moments in her daily life, in Evelyn, the main character's daily life, where she does have a little bit of choice, and then at work where she has absolutely none at all.
Let's just sit here dead air for 5 minutes to subvert the
subvert the notion of a podcast.
We did that in our intro, I think, but
yeah. So when Sid Meier says, a game is a series of interesting choices or decisions, you don't necessarily agree with that.
I think it's, well...
Sid Meier's going to be listening, so you better be careful.
Okay. Well, then, no, I actually don't agree that a game is a series of interesting choices. I think that what a game is actually very difficult to define, and once when you read game theory stuff, like people are like, Ludwig Wittgenstein picked the word game as an example of a word that's impossible to define. And he had all these examples about like how you can't define the word game. It's worth reading. Everyone has their own definition of game, I think. A lot of people think that visual novels are not games at all. But I think that Eliza does have interesting choices in it, or at least one interesting choice in it. And so if Eliza is a series of one very interesting choice, is it a game or not? I don't know. I'll let you decide, as long as you buy it and play it.
Well, I'm happy. Whatever you think of it is, like it's. I think that what it's doing to me, how it's making me think about the topics at hand, how it's making me think about the world around me. I don't think that could be done as effectively if it were a game that were, as soon as I say this, some like indie's going to release an amazing game with lots of choice and stuff like that. But like this game, I just don't, it would, like the fact that it takes away the agency from me, that really, that grabs me and it's compelling.
It's a deliberate choice. Like, again, like I said, like, at Zachtronics, like we make these extremely mechanics heavy games, right? So it's not like beyond us to design a therapy game where like procedurally generated people come in who have like 4 or 5 conditions, and you like have to like give them procedurally generated like prescriptions or like figure out what to say to make them feel better. And then we've created this like weird like simulation-y kind of model of like mental health, which is like weird and not something I wanted to get into, right? Because then as soon as you start designing a system around that, then you're starting to make this procedural argument that like, oh, if someone is depressed, they need this, right? Like if someone has X problem, then they need Y, and if you don't give them that, then they're bad, and if you do give them that, then they're better. And it's like, I didn't want to, like, every person in Eliza is just their own person. They're their own specific like case, and the reason why that's true is because it's a completely linear and there's no choice. And again, that's a deliberate decision. Modeling mental health just seems like such a minefield of like unintended like consequences and things, arguments that I didn't want to make.
It's a deliberate decision that kind of makes a commentary on that way of thinking, because there's like one specific person in general where Chris and I both talked about it, and we're like, yeah, she just came in to like have a chat, and the AI is like, well, here's a pill for you,
right?
And like a lot of that is just kind of like you sit there at your computer going like, oh, this is
my
a
eyes like
commentary.
pop out of my head.
Yeah.
It's like, wait a minute, and then you have to sit there, and then you have to repeat what the AI says, and it feels like you are making things worse, that you're contributing to something bad. And then you get into all of this stuff like, you start thinking, what am I involved in? What am I doing, to this world? What's my impact on this world? Is like these little things that you do, is that making it better? Is that helping people?
Right. And that's kind of the ultimate like question that the game asks, right? Which is, what are you how are you contributing to the world, and how do you feel good about what you're doing?
Yeah.
I'm gonna.
Well, yeah.
No, don't wrap it up. I'm gonna hijack. I have one more question I want to ask before. I know we're running short on time. But it's half a credit to the voice acting and half a credit to the writing that like all of those characters and all those situations in like the Eliza therapy sessions all seem human and not like people. I think it's easy when you're dealing with mental health topics and trauma and anxieties and stuff like that to write characters that are just those traits. But like so far, all the people I've encountered feel like they have rounded out lives and that everything seems like amazingly human in actuality. And I guess I wonder if you can talk a little bit about writing human characters or the voice acting process of coaching into getting this really genuine feeling in each of those very personal, intimate moments.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I could talk about both of those things for a really long time. But I'll say, I'll start with the voice acting. Like when the voice actors came in, we just talked about how I told them that I was interested in getting very naturalistic performances and not stagey performances, and not to worry about like where one line begins and where one line ends. Oftentimes in game scripts, the lines have to be very separate. And actors who know how to act for games know to like pause between lines because they're going to be cut up into the dialogue stuff. And I said, well, if it feels natural to like just run into the next sentence, just do that, and I'll fix it on my end so that the like one line becomes two lines or two lines become one line, and stuff like that. And sentences that I had written that were like weirdly stilted or whatever, like we kind of fixed in the recording booth as we went, just to find that like really natural delivery and that really natural performance. And a lot of that, was the actors responding to me, like trusting them with the material. Like I didn't try to say it this way or come at it this exact way. It was like more like providing a space to let them find a place to take it. So that's like the kind of the voice acting part. And again, I could talk about that for a really long time. The other thing was, I did some, when I was doing my research before or during writing this, I spoke to some mental health professionals, interviewed them. I also drew on my own experience going to therapy, and sort of like what I know from my friends as well who have experienced similar things. And I think it was important to me to like show that people, you don't talk about your deepest problem like the first thing when you walk into your therapist's office, right? You don't just like immediately bring up the thing that's like lurking underneath everything at all. You don't just like, you're not like it's not like your therapist is like, how are you? And you're like, oh, my parents disowned me. Like that's like lurking in the background. And sometimes it takes like multiple sessions to even get anywhere near there. Yeah. A lot of people don't talk, like they don't even feel comfortable talking about the real issue. And so like showing that people don't necessarily just like do that was also very important to me. That there's always like something, the real issue is kind of lurking in the background a lot of the time. And if the therapy clients feel more human for that reason, I think it's that part of that approach, in the writing to get there.
Last question before we let you go. Is there any happy ending in this relationship between humans and technology?
Like in the real world? Like
in the real world. Yeah.
I think that it is possible. I'm not sure if it is probable, but I think that it is possible because I believe that technology itself on its own is neutral, right? And it's really just how we use it. Like technology on its own is not good or bad. It's how it's applied. And if we are careful and think about how we apply technology, then we can benefit from it.
And of course, we're all being very careful.
And we're doing a great job of it so far.
You hear that Amazon Alexa in the corner?
Yeah, right. Nothing to worry about. I feel like everything's going smoothly. I don't know about you guys, but I think everything's going great.
Love that technology.
Right, you love that technology.
Yeah. On that note, we all love technology. We also all love Eliza. And thank you so much, Matthew, for joining us. And best of luck with the game.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
right. Matthew's out of the room now. That's heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Right?
I kind of just want to swoop back to my notes that started off with visual novels. What a genre.
Yeah. I want to swoop back into the fetal position. No, it's such a good game, and hopefully it doesn't, turn people off who might be listening to this. That it is, there's some profound stuff in there, right?
Yeah. The last thing we want to do is get guests on the show and then discourage people from playing their games. But I think the one thing that I tried to get at it when we were all chatting, but the one nice thing about Eliza is it feels like it deals with a lot of heavy topics, but it gives them the weight that they deserve and the amount of thought they deserve, and the entire game's about kind of like the same questions that you're asking as you're playing it. So in that note, the writing is very... I have like the word meaningful written like a million times throughout my notes here, because everything everything just feels meaningful and feels very cared about.
Yeah, absolutely. And, a lot of sci-fi, which, this is very near future sci-fi, I think, is really kind of, there's kind of one point of view, and it's technology sucks and we're all doomed. And this isn't like that. There are characters who really believe in this kind of AI-based therapy. There's a character that really believes that this is going to help people, and that's the reason that they're in it. So you have you have a spectrum of people who think of Eliza, the AI, in all these different ways. You have the extreme, who is this character, Nora, who used to work on the project, and then she left to lead the life of a musician and an artist, and then she becomes one of the harshest critics of it. Whereas you have the big CEOs of these tech companies who are all about it. And then you have the people in the middle who are somewhere in between.
Yeah. If you break it down to like its most basic parts, there are like these very clear, like against, for, chaotic in the middle, kind of like these very clear sides. But in the actual implementation of it, it's really like human and believable, and it's a really good game. Visual novels are good. Yeah.
It reminds me of, and people will see this, or people have seen it if they've played the game. It reminded me of when I was in college a little bit, and I was telemarketing, and it's like stick to the script, and then you have your boss. Yes, I was a telemarketer. I was one of those awful people.
Shaking my head. You can't see it, but I hope you can feel it.
It was college. I needed the money, which is probably what a lot of these proxies in Eliza thought. It was college. I needed the money, so I became a proxy for machine learning robot thing. But yeah, stick to the script. You have no agency, and by the way, your boss is listening in on you, and make sure that you're doing the job right.
I think like my one big like high level takeaway from this conversation is just the kind of benefit of not sticking to your brand, I guess, in a way, because this this in a million years, 3 weeks ago when this was announced, every single headline was like, Zachtronics is making a visual novel. No one could believe, because it's such a out there game based on like the past library that they'd put out before. But like they did it and they went for it, and it resonates in such a great way where like sometimes you have to step out of your comfort zone, and everyone should make a visual novel is what I'm getting at.
And I've seen some of the user reviews. Pray for me. I went into the Steam user review section.
Brave.
But yeah, I was just looking at it, and there are Zachtronics fans of the previous games who really like this one. So, there might be more overlap than you think.
Yeah, it's interesting how like kind of the theme of they went from puzzle games for programmers to kind of like a game about like big like the programming like morality question is there, and there's always this kind of like underlying beat that's just very interesting to see when they deviate from genre. So it's just a very cool outcome.
When I talked to Zach at GDC, he was very much like, I mean they released a huge instruction manual for I think it's for TIS, and it's actually like an engineering manual. It's like meant to be like an actual electronics like engineering manual. And so, you got that novelty thing, and Matthew did work on that as well. But you do have this reputation. Like even Zach was like, if you don't understand our games, I don't care. And their crowd at GDC would just like, yeah, because it does give you kind of a special thing. Like, I understand this. Like, this is a game for me, for my brain. And then you come out with this that kind of that questions a lot of things that programming lays the foundation for. Oh yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, I think like all of my in the conversation notes are just like things I wanted to dig in on more, because there's just so much cool surrounding how this came to be.
Yeah, and it touches on so many different things. Now, we're not talking spoilers here, so yeah, keep listening. But it talks about, it touches on things like, as a society in today's world where coding, yes, it's important, STEM is very important and all that, but at the same time, we are devaluing the arts, for example. We are associating intelligence with one skill set. Know what I'm saying? Which is, coding. That's a smart thing to do. And then, if you don't know how to code, you just, write books. One of those in our society is valued over the other.
Yeah, there's Nora. I'm so bad with names. That applies to game characters as well. But Nora, the programmer turned really cool DJ.
Musician.
Yeah. And like there's a conversation early on. It's all early on, no spoilers. That kind of like equates certain things in her programming life to using those same skills as artistic expression as a musician, and like just a lot of really cool kind of little conversation starters in there to really make you think. Yeah,
she's like an electronic musician, and she's using all of this stuff. Her music is about input and output.
I meant to mention it when Matthew was still on the call, but
we'll email him. We'll call him up.
That song was really good, and I wanted to mention it. But the music's really great too, and there's a lot of like subtle things to it. And I should have said that when he was on the call, but
well, Matthew is too good at too many things. There's not enough. This podcast isn't long enough to
to go through all of his skills,
all of his talents. So the game is great. It's Eliza. I think that's it. We should wind her down here, right?
Yeah.
We're actually on iTunes and Google Play, which I don't think anybody uses. So shout out to people who use Google Play for podcasts, and also Spotify. And we're actually getting some followers off of our first one. Which is good.
Spotify's podcast stuff has apparently gotten a lot better just in the past couple months. Not just because the GDC podcast is now on the platform, but like
I think that it was us. Yeah.
we kicked it off, but yeah.
Yeah, it was us. All you people who want to do a new podcast, ride the wave of the GDC podcast. So we're gonna go now. I'm Chris Graft.
I'm Alyssa McAloon.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, or on Spotify, follow. And if you love us, rate us. We'd really appreciate that. Have a good one. See you next time.